cozy, so the chicken feels secure when they're laying their eggs, and they'll want to lay their eggs there because it'll feel like a natural nesting spot. I found that it's important to have them easily cleanable. So for instance, our first iteration, so we've had a few different experiments with our chicken pen right now. And one of the experiments we did was we put our nesting boxes at the same height as the roosts. So actually, the roosts coming across were part of the supports for the nesting boxes. What that ended up meaning is that the chickens just wanted to roost in the nesting boxes. Well, when they put their rear ends over the nesting box, all they do is poop all night long, and you'd have a big mess in the nesting boxes, and that wasn't good for anybody. So we had to board that off and move them down lower. Chickens will try to roost as high as possible, so you need to put your nesting boxes below your roosts, but not underneath your roosts. So the level of them need to be below, but not underneath, because if they're underneath, the chickens will be pooping all night long, and that will go right into the nesting boxes, and it'll make your eggs nasty and your life miserable. Something I prefer to do with my nesting boxes is make them accessible from the outside of the pen, so that I don't have to go in through the chicken manure or in through the pen to get to the eggs. I have them mounted on the outside of the chicken coop with holes accessible on the inside. You can use all sorts of things to do it, but I think that about a 12-inch by 12-inch nesting box, and if you have a dozen birds, then probably 4 nesting boxes is plenty of room for that. Also, my wife Lindsay has some good advice to read about on her at grit.com. It's Haven Homesteaders for Grit, and in her article Working Chickens Part 2, Counting Hens, she talks about how many chickens to have in your space and maybe how many chickens you need for how many eggs you're trying to get, just things like that. It's a 7-part blog post, so there's lots of good information in there. She did a lot of research for it, so I'd suggest checking that out. In your coop, just as a side note, they say you need about 3 square feet of coop space per bird. That just depends on what they have outside. I've seen some people that have a lot of coop space for not that many birds, and I've seen a very minimal coop space, but they have a lot of outside space to run around in. So it really depends on your situation. But just as a rule of thumb, 3 square feet of coop per bird, and 10 to 15 square feet of run space. Alright, well I think that about does it for this episode. I also want to put a shameless plug in for our Patreon account. We just opened that up, and that's at Patreon, patreon.com, and that helps support this show. You can sign up and support us for $1 a month, which is only 25 cents an episode. So it'll keep the show on the road and help us out immensely, and I'd appreciate if you'd consider doing that. Also, don't forget we're at havenhomestead.com, and you can find this show and the show notes and the other things that we're doing there. Thanks for listening to the Haven Homestead podcast, where we learn and grow together on our way to living more sustainable lives.